At Arm's Length, Episode 9. Sandra was quiet during the car ride to see Sabine in her home that evening. She had not been able to forget Alex's words from that morning. It felt exciting being a part of the investigation, the lawyer in her hoping they'd get the culprit and she could make sure Gabrielle got justice for her mother. But it had suddenly hit her. She turned at the sound of Alex's voice. He had said something to her, but she had been miles away. Sorry? What did you say? I asked how your case is going. You seem preoccupied. That's your fault. Filling my head with the idea that this could be dangerous. Now I keep thinking that something could happen to Gabrielle. If Deborah is the murderess, she knows she's investigating in Benin. She could have her killed. One doesn't even need to be present to arrange that. Well, now that you're contemplating that possibility, everyone can be more cautious. I'm surprised you didn't arrive at the same conclusion. You are a lawyer. You know people bury evidence, especially when they've already committed a crime. Do you think they'll have any qualms in getting rid of Gabrielle? How important do you think it would be for that person to continue keeping the 27-year-old secret buried? Alex asked, his eyes on the road. So you think her mother is dead? Don't you? He asked her. Yes, I do. From what everyone has said, she just wasn't the kind of person to pack up and leave. But if they were wrong, let's assume for a moment that she had everyone fooled. Where's the evidence of this lover? Nobody saw him, heard of him, no letters. Women keep those things. Now we just send emails or messages, but then it was letters people wrote. There should be a stack of them somewhere tied with a purple ribbon. No, I tell you, something terrible happened in that house that day, and that woman is dead. The thing is, Gabrielle was told that all her life, so she accepted it and lived with barely having any family. Once she found out about the note, I saw hope in her eyes. It was fighting to come out amidst the logic of the situation. I know she left it all to go and see if she could find her, and if there would be a plausible explanation for the last 27 years of her life, but I'm afraid that the most she will get is an understanding of what happened. But there will be no happy ever after ending to this, Sandra replied. She's going to need you when this is over. It's going to hit her really hard, Alex said. She'll shut herself up in her workshop and create. The world will get another sublime collection and they will be none the wiser. Meanwhile, she'll settle for Paul, who doesn't challenge her in any way and has been involving himself as little as possible in her problems, burying his head in the sand like an ostrich. Do you know that he plans to see her father to ask for her hand in marriage? You can't blame him. I would have done exactly the same thing, he replied, his eyes still on the road as Sandra studied him. Don't you care? I thought beneath your air of indifference there were some real feelings for her. Of course I do. That's why I'm in a car with you going to see a woman that otherwise would have held no interest for me. That's why I'm going to Benin tomorrow. I'm not good at sitting back and watching things unfold from a distance. For a second you had me scared. I have a feeling Paul doesn't like me much and will make his feelings known once they get married. Sandra smiled cheekily. And come between you two. And you assume I like you more? He asked seriously. I know you do. Oh, we're here. Let's see what Sabine has done with herself after all these years. They got out of the parked car and rang the doorbell. A lanky teenage boy, after briefly removing his earphones to ask what they wanted, let them in and pointed towards the entrance of the bungalow. Don't you have openings for training and practicals in your company? I think that young man is the definition of hard work and dedication, Sandra whispered, nudging Alex. The youth had turned around and left them to their own devices. They could hear the music he was listening to through his earphones. Anyone within a radius of 3 kilometers could do so. He'll fit right in. Underneath all that you're seeing lies a very creative mind, he grinned back at her. They were let in by a young girl who bore some resemblance to the youth and invited them to sit down. A few minutes later, a woman came in, drying her hands on a tea towel. She had a welcoming smile and dimples that brightened up her face. Hi, I'm Sabine. Sorry to have kept you waiting. I was preparing dinner and wanted to leave it at a stage in which my daughter would be unable to spoil it, although you never know. All she has to do is stir. I spoke to Gabrielle on the phone and she explained that you'd be coming to see me. I can't believe she remembered me. Well, mostly for the time she fell and I helped dress her wounds. That was some fall, but she barely cried. Poor thing. Probably to avoid getting scolded, as she'd been warned not to go up the tree. But her mother took one look at her and decided she'd been punished enough. Would you like something to drink? What can I offer you? I'd love some cold water. Alex? That's fine for me too. The girl was called and asked to bring what they had asked for. Sandra had hoped that her absence from the kitchen would not be the excuse for the food getting burnt, remembering how she had exasperated her own mother while growing up, which suddenly made her green. So, did you like it there? Sandra asked her. Auntie Sophie treated me very well. She gave me clothes that were hers, some even new. I was what one could call slender then, so they fitted me. And even though I didn't stay the 2 weeks, I got full pay. The lawyer continued her questioning. What reason were you given for not being needed anymore? She said that she was feeling much better and that she wasn't good at not doing anything. But she reassured me that she'd been happy with my work and she just needed to keep busy. I wanted to stay. I didn't like the man packed outside the house or the other one that came to see her one day. I know I was just a girl, but I didn't want to leave her all alone. And then there was that awful argument with her sister and her friend. It was the day after that when she informed me that I needn't come back. Sandra looked at Alex. Where to start? She was in her element, questioning witnesses, and this one had given her a number of openings. Which man went to see her? And why didn't you like him? She asked. I let him in and went to get her, as Samuel, the security man, had cleared him, so I thought it was fine. But when I told her his name, I can't remember now what it was. She said I was to tell him that she was sorry, but she couldn't see him, and that he should please come back when her husband was home, or better still, speak to him in the office. I went out to relay the message, and he became enraged. He even made an attempt to barge into her room. He said I was to tell her that she'd better be careful about the next steps she took, that he was not a man to be played with. I pleaded with him for a while to leave, and at one point yelled for Samuel to come. That was when he finally left. I remember he shouted at Samuel, "What are you going to do to me? Have you forgotten that I got you this job?" The boy just stood there in silence, not knowing what to do. Finally, he stormed out, and I went to see how Auntie Sophie was. Did you speak to Samuel afterwards? Alex asked. As a matter of fact, I did. Auntie Sophie got a headache and went to bed, and I was curious as to who that man was. He told me that he'd recommended him for the job as a security guard there. They were townsmen and attended the same progressive union. Samuel had approached him as he was an affluent member of the community and had asked that he help him get a job. But he claimed not to know much more about him and to be surprised about how aggressive the man could be. Sandra posed her next question. What about the man in the car? I noticed that his black car would be parked just outside the house. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was difficult to miss as it was a luxury car. But I would find it there at odd hours of the day, and there was always a man in the driver's seat. Always the same man. One day, he stopped me and gave me a note for Auntie Sophie. I gave it to her, and she seemed quite upset by it, and asked me not to accept anything else from him. The next morning, on my way into work, he stopped me and asked if there was any reply for him. I said no and made a move to hurry in, but he detained me and opened his wallet, produced a wad of notes and offered it to me. He said there could be much more for me if I cooperated. When I asked what he wanted me to do, he gave me his card and said I was to call him and tell him when Aunt Sophie was home alone. I am ashamed to say it, now that I am older and know that he was up to no good. But I took the money from him and said I would. But about 3 days later, I was talking to Samuel near the main gate when we heard a commotion and looked outside. The man had grabbed her and was trying to get her into his car. I ran outside and started pounding his back with my fist, which attracted the attention of another passerby, and he let go of her. Auntie Sophie was shaking. I sat her down and made her tea with a lot of sugar. She told me I was not to tell anyone what had happened, least of all Uncle Andrew. Did you ever call him to give him the information he requested? Alex asked. No, no, no. Not after what I witnessed. I was shaking. What had he wanted her for? I thought maybe for a ritual killing, that he'd been asked to bring a light-skinned woman, and if he complied, he'd be promised fame and great wealth. I kept well out of his way, and from then on, made sure I crossed to the other side of the street long before I reached the house, in case he was waiting there. Did you tell anyone about his offer? Was the next question, this time from Sandra. I did not, Sabine replied vehemently. Sabine, this is very serious. We don't want to alarm you, but it might turn into a criminal investigation, even after so many years. I am the best criminal lawyer in this country, so should you lie to us now and be called as a witness, I promise you I will destroy you on the stand. Now I ask you again, did you tell anyone else about the offer that man made you and the money that changed hands in return for information? The atmosphere in the room had changed. It was no longer a friendly walk down memory lane. Alex watched both women. Sandra's unwavering gaze was fixed on Sabine, who lowered her head. I told Samuel. We agreed to share the money, and that after my 2 weeks were over, if she came home unexpectedly, he would call the number on the card and give me a share of whatever he received. But that was before the incident I just told you about. I got so scared that I decided to keep away from him. Only Samuel? Try and remember, Sandra pressed. No. The day Auntie Sophie's friend and sister had that terrible fight, I told them too. They were on their way out and I was going to collect the little girl that had been playing next door, thankfully, so she didn't witness what happened. The other lady seemed to already know about the incident and was very angry. She was yelling at Auntie Sophie's sister, telling her that the man had tried to kidnap her, and she didn't believe her. She said she was making it up to try and make her feel bad, so I told her that it was true. That had I not intervened, he would have succeeded. I told them that he offered me money to inform him, but I didn't tell them that I'd accepted it. The friend told her that she hoped she was very happy, that now Uncle Andrew was out of town and that she'd succeeded in having them both thrown out after endangering the life of her sister, who was going to watch out for her. She was so angry. She pointed her finger at her, warning her and telling her that she was responsible for whatever happened to her sister. Sandra studied her quietly, her gaze fixed on her. That was all that happened. I never spoke to him again, and I gave the card to Samuel. Am I in trouble? What exactly is this about? A crime that was committed in the past, but you're not in trouble. Thank you for seeing us. Please call me at this number if you remember anything else. Sandra handed her card to her, and they stood up to leave. By the way, did you ever hear from Samuel after you left the house? Alex asked. Yes, He wrote me a few letters. He gained admission into the polytechnic in his town of origin to study, but I can't remember where or if he even finished. We lost contact after a while. Do you still have his letters or the address? Sandra asked. I'm not sure. I could look for them, she replied, still nervous after her intense interrogation. Please do. Anything would help. His last name, the address, and send whatever information you get to me as soon as possible. This is very important, the lawyer stressed, and Sabine nodded, a worried look on her face. Once in the car, Alex looked at her and grinned. Sandra, I would not like to be a witness waiting to be cross-examined by you. No, you wouldn't, was her reply as she looked out of the window. Alex, like you said, this is serious. Trying to put the pieces together. I can't help but imagine how Sophie felt. Scared, alone, betrayed. But what terrifies me most is that Gabrielle has spoken or will speak to the person that killed her mother. They were both quiet until Alex dropped her off at her house. Suddenly, things had taken a very sinister turn, and it made her nervous not knowing who the enemy was, or when and how that person would strike again. Gabrielle had been invited to her aunt's house for lunch, and Peter was driving her there. She had decided that it was as good a time as any to call her father and check on him. Alex would be arriving sometime that day, and when she had mentioned to her grandmother that a friend would be in town, she had invited him for dinner. How are you, father? I hope you've gone for a walk this morning. Remember, the doctor said you have to exercise and the fresh air will do you good. What does that man know? Have you seen him? He looks like someone that hasn't gone on a walk in his life. The size of his stomach resembles that of a 5-month pregnancy. I almost asked him for his due date, and he has the effrontery to tell me to go out for a daily stroll or get a personal trainer. And which fresh air. You can fry an egg on the stones of the patio. It's particularly hot today. You people need to stop giving me advice that will probably send me to an early grave. He's a heart specialist. He knows what he's talking about. Exercise is necessary, whether one suffers from an ailment or not. Look, you don't have to go very far. Your garden is immense, so why don't you walk around it a few times a day? And when I get back to Lagos, I can get you a personal trainer that will make you a proper fitness and training schedule. As for the heat, you can avoid it by going outside first thing in the morning. Did I tell you that I want to compete in the next Olympics? Deborah, the doctor, and you have all decided to make me miserable for the rest of my days. I should walk around my own garden in circles, aimlessly, then wake up early to do that. And then you want to starve me too. I'm going to the office tomorrow. I haven't died yet, but it seems you three are planning my funeral. Father, that's too soon. Is Deborah aware of your plans? She'll find out tomorrow. Anyway, let's change the subject. I even prefer we talk about the progress on your investigation than my health. What new thing have you found out to disprove the fact that your mother ran away with the man in the black car? Well, I found out a good number of things that I'm still processing. But the man in the black car was definitely not her lover. He was stalking her, Gabrielle clarified. Is that what they call it now? Stalking? He was waiting for her outside the house. I am sure as soon as I left, she would run out to meet him. That's not what people have said. All the eyewitnesses agree on the same story, that she was afraid of him. I read the letters he wrote her. They became quite threatening towards the end. He was obsessed with her. And you believe them? Why would she be afraid and not tell me? Her father asked. What would you have done if she had? I would have beaten him senseless and then called the police and had what was left of him arrested. Maybe that's why she didn't tell you anything. What if in your defense of her you went too far? What if the police took you away instead of him? Do you know that he tried to kidnap her? She was being forced into his car when Sabine, the girl that took care of me for a short while, saw it and went to help her. If not for her, he would have succeeded. She also told her friend Loveth, who confirmed that my mother was terrified of that man. What? He dared put his hands on her? What is his name? Chief Ibrahim asked furiously. Calm down, father. I'm going to see him to find out if he had anything to do with her disappearance. See who? That criminal? No, no, no. I forbid you. I'll send people to go and see him. Give me his name and address. Now you're talking like a mafia lord. I'm not going alone. Alexander Jacobs is coming with me. He has asked that I don't go alone, and I promise to wait, she reassured her father. See? The doctor said I was to remain calm, and you've given me something to worry about. After, you'll advise me to watch what I eat and go out and exercise in the meantime. You are the reason why my blood pressure is still so high. I still don't understand why your mother didn't tell me anything. Judging by his reaction, Gabrielle understood only too well the reason. She would have done the same thing. She was regretting telling her father anything. Now she had given him something to fixate on. Father, breathe and relax. I'm just trying to retrace her last moments to understand what happened. I think he was watching the house, and when she came home unexpectedly that day, he saw his chance and took her away after forcing her to write you that letter. But we need proof. The case will not stand in court with mere suppositions. That man had better not have touched a hair on her head. I'm coming to Benin. He'll confess, don't worry. He doesn't know who I am and what I am capable of doing to him. No, no, no. Stay where you are. Let me speak to him first. Then I'll tell you what I find out. We don't know what happened. Did you know that she'd gone home earlier that day? Gabrielle asked. No. I found out afterwards when I went home and read the note. I called the office to say I wouldn't be going in the next day, and Helen, the girl that did the administrative work alongside Deborah, asked me how she was feeling. I'd been away all day on a construction site, getting building materials, and I actually went directly to pick you up from school. And then we went home and... I need to think about what you just told me. I have to go now. Father, don't think too much. We have no idea what really happened. Mentioning it was a bad idea. I guess I jumped on it in order to refute the theory of her having left us. Walk around the garden like I told you. You'll be asked tomorrow when I call again if you have done so. They had arrived at her destination, and she told Peter to collect her in 2 hours. She had a list of groceries her grandmother had asked if she minded getting for her on her way back. The house was a duplex, though she noticed its garden wasn't as well cared for as her grandmother's as she walked towards the door. A woman in uniform let her in and invited her to take a seat. Gabrielle had no idea what to make of her aunt after hearing so many contradictory stories. A moment later, she came down the stairs with a huge grin on her face. Gabby, I'm so happy you could make it. Chris will be joining us for lunch so you can meet him. What have you been up to? I went to the school my mother worked in. I met with the principal that had been a teacher at the time, and with Moso Ndiaye. I remember it very well. Every time I drive past, I'm flooded with memories. I went there a few times. Did you discover anything new? Gabrielle observed her. It was difficult knowing what to say or not, as the only persons she had ruled out from her list of suspects were her father and grandmother. She said a silent prayer, asking for wisdom before speaking. They spoke very well of her. Monsieur Ndiaye told me that she didn't feel well the day she disappeared and went home, so he covered her classes. They both told me about an argument you both had in the car park. It apparently was quite heated. This was a few days prior to her disappearance. Her aunt raised an eyebrow and made a sound of disbelief as Gabrielle tried to read what she was thinking from her facial expression. Amazing what people will remember. It was nothing, just a normal spat between sisters. Really? Because you both had a very violent quarrel that got out of hand a few days earlier in our house. I see you found Loveth, who gave her version of events. You mustn't believe everything you hear. That woman was always trying to come between us, and she almost succeeded that time. What happened? I was looking out for Sophie. One day outside her house, this man called out to me and started speaking to me in a familiar way. He evidently didn't know who I was, and I admit that at first I found it amusing. I knew who he was, and I thought it would be fun to pretend I was Sophie. So I accepted a date with him. Just lunch. That was when Loveth walked up to us and asked what I thought I was doing, called me wicked and walked away. I knew she was going straight to Sophie to give her version of things, so I asked Steve to take me there. I would be faster as she didn't have a car and had to wait for a taxi. He didn't realize what was going on, even though he heard me being called Elise. I cut Loveth off before she could say more. He really wasn't the brightest crayon in the box. Anyway, I got there and told Sophie that I'd had a run-in with Loveth, and apparently she thought I was dating her stalker. Sophie went ballistic. True, she hadn't given me a lot of details about what he'd been doing, but she had mentioned that he made her feel very uncomfortable. Anyway, Loveth came and things got out of hand, and she said really terrible things to me. I had no idea that he'd tried to kidnap her. When we got outside, the girl that was helping her heard us arguing and confirmed that Steve had tried to force her into his car and had even paid her money to keep him informed. At that point, it stopped being a game or a stupid argument. I got really scared. See? The thing is, I knew Steve by reputation, and it wasn't a good one. So, angry as I was with the interfering Loveth, I decided to keep pretending to be Sophie, and I met up with him a few more times just to see how far he was willing to go with his obsession. The argument in school was because she found out I was still seeing him, but I was trying to protect her. I wanted to know what his plan was. Do you know what he told me? What? He said I'd been lucky. Had I not agreed to come out with him, his plan was to visit the house with his men the next time I was alone and bundle me away. He still had no idea then that I wasn't Sophie. Gabrielle listened in shock as she tried to digest her aunt's version. Look, I know it sounds terrible. Believe me, I've kicked myself over and over again because my intentions weren't good in the beginning. But as soon as I found out just how serious things were, I really was trying to protect her and get him away from her. She was home alone that morning. He could have paid someone else to inform him. It was the perfect opportunity for him, Gabrielle said. Her aunt had gone pale and they looked at each other, not knowing what to say. A man walked in, beaming at them, and gave Elise a peck on the cheek. You must be Gabrielle. She got up, mechanically forcing a smile on her face and walking up to hug him. He was a tall, pleasant man who soon took charge of the conversation, which was a good thing, as the meal went by in a blur for her. She would not have been able to say what she had eaten had she been asked later on, she thought afterwards. Back in the car, there was a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach that for some reason just would not go away. Is something bothering you? Ivan asked. I mean, not that I know you well enough to say you are not your usual self, but you do seem quite pensive. I'm just thinking, coming here has opened me up to a world I didn't even know existed. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, Gabrielle replied. Yvonne hugged her. She was a hugger, something Gabrielle had not been exposed to at any point in the life she could remember. She wasn't a physically demonstrative person, and she was sure a shrink would link it to the distance her father had always kept her at. I feel the same way. For so long I've yearned to see Sophie and you. I pray every day for your mother. Not knowing is torture, and for a parent it's a terrible way to live, always paying attention to the news or walking faster when you see someone that looks like her, even calling out her name at times. I know that people think that her not being here is an indication that she's dead, but if there's a tiny ray of hope, I'll cling to it. You don't know how happy I am to have found you again. You won't remember the evenings we spent together in my kitchen. Back then, we lived in another house, and you would sit on a high stool and watch me or help me bake biscuits. You loved my coconut biscuits. Can we make them again? Gabrielle asked the woman. Of course we can. And this time, you can make them yourself. I'll watch and direct from the sidelines. The doorbell rang, and she wiped her hands on the dishcloth. The security man had escorted Alex, and once she opened the door, he greeted her and went back to his post. She smiled at Alex and let him in. Hello? You didn't get lost or anything? No. As expected, your directions were clear and precise. I didn't know what to bring, so I got a bottle of wine. How kind of you. Please have a seat. I'll just put it away. Ron-Mare, do you need any help? No, I'm fine. Entertain your guest. Gabrielle did not think she would be so happy to see Alex, considering she hadn't known him for that long. So she was surprised that she felt quite glad to have him sitting in her living room. It somehow made it easier to share directly with someone what was going on and not through calls or text messages. You don't look at ease. What could be making the great Alexander Jacobs nervous? She asked. You, was the simple answer she got, and she raised an eyebrow and shook her head, laughing. Sandra called me last night and filled me in on everything. I went to see my aunt today, and it just felt really uncomfortable, not knowing what lay behind her smile. For some reason, I couldn't wait to get out of there. It's driving me crazy, not knowing. And then I am conscious of the fact that after such a long time, we might not even find anything. What if Paul's right? I'll just waste my time and everyone else's, dredging up a painful past for nothing. She covered her face with her hands for a moment, and then looked at him, searching for an answer. Selfishly, I tell you to leave it, because I think it's very complicated. But you deserve to know the truth, and from what we know, I don't think your mother left willingly, Alex replied. Thank you, she mouthed, as her grandmother came in and Alex got up to greet her courteously. Dinner is served. They followed her to the dining room and sat down. I am going to find it difficult to shed the weight from my stay with you, Ron-Mare, Gabrielle said, as she looked at the food on the table. You need to eat properly. You still have space to fill. I am sure Alex will agree with me. He laughed and held up his hands in surrender, not wishing to get involved in the conversation. I am happy to have met your young man. He's very attractive and well-mannered, Gabby. So how did you two meet? Gabrielle almost choked on the food she was eating and had to drink some water as she avoided Alex's amused grin. We're just friends. I'm seeing someone else. Paul. Look, this is a photograph of him. She showed her a picture on her mobile, not looking at the man sitting across the table from her. Really? You've never mentioned him to me, the older woman said in surprise. Neither have I mentioned Alex. He's just a friend. Paul asked me to marry him just before I came here. He wants to take things to the next level. And what did you say to him? Her grandmother asked. I said I'll give him my answer when I get back to Lagos. There was just too much going on at the time. I see. So how did you meet Alex? Now that we've established that you're just friends with him. He spoke to my father about wanting to go on a date with me, and my father passed on the message. We went out a few times and became friends, Gabrielle explained in short sentences. The woman raised her eyebrow at that and said nothing more on the subject, and the conversation turned to lighter topics like places they had lived in. Why don't you put your feet up and watch your telenovela? Alex and I will do the dishes. I don't mind. Doing the house chores keeps me active and busy. Please, we insist. The meal was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. My evening at the hotel would have been nowhere as lovely as this, Alex said. She gave them a knowing smile and left as they cleared the table. I didn't want to say anything in front of her, as it upsets her. But when are we going to see Steve Egosa? Gabrielle asked Alex. Tomorrow. I've got an appointment with him at 11 a.m. How did you manage that? Well, I am the owner of an airline company. My secretary called his secretary and requested a meeting, and he agreed, Alex replied. Using your influence. For once, I approve. I'll come and pick you up at your hotel at 10:30. I'll pick you up. I have a car. I like driving. She nodded in acceptance as she handed him a plate to dry and hang on the rack in the cupboard. So, from what we know, who do you think is responsible for my mother's disappearance? She asked. It had to be someone that knew she was home that day. I don't think it was by chance. The only way that it would have been a coincidence is if the group of robbers, thinking nobody was home, surprised her and shot her. But it wouldn't explain the note. No, the note makes it personal. I think Samuel might know more than he said. I need to ask my father when he left our employ, if it was at the same time we left for Lagos or earlier. Steve's my number one suspect. He offered Sabine money, so I think he got informed that my mother was home. He sent Samuel on an errand, came with his men, forced my mother to write that note, and then she probably resisted and one of them shot her. They were able to clean up the evidence and waited until we left to come and paint the wall to avoid leaving any loose ends in case there was an investigation. She shook her head, trying not to imagine how scared her mother must have been. Hang on, let me call my father. Something just occurred to me, Gabrielle said, picking up her phone, dialing and putting it on speaker. Hello, father. Were you sleeping? It just occurred to me as I was waiting for you to pick up that it might be a bit late for you, but there's something I wanted to ask. The day you got home and found mother gone, was there something different in the living room? A piece of furniture that had been moved or something that struck you as out of place? Do you think I had time to look around me to see if your mother had redecorated? Was the gruff reply she received. Just humor me. You drove in and Samuel opened the gate for you, I assume. You opened the door and everything up to that point was in order. What did you do when you walked in through the door? I walked in with you. I had gone to pick you up from school. You ran inside, probably to look in our room as you normally did, to see if your mother was home. I left my briefcase on a sofa and walked towards the kitchen to get a glass of water. Then I went to the bedroom. The note was on my pillow. Yes, but on the way, was there something out of place in the living room? Didn't we have an entertainment center? I seem to remember a big dark brown structure and sitting down in front of it to watch TV. Just close your eyes and try to remember, she asked excitedly. Why do I have to close my eyes to remember? Andrew Ibrahim asked impatiently. It helps so you can just focus on that memory and forget all your present surroundings. No, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Everything was in its place. Oh, wait. One of the shelves on the entertainment center had its contents changed. It was a four-piece structure, if you remember. Two tall piers flanking both sides of the TV stand, and a shelf above that. Well, one of the piers, I think the right one, I can't be sure now, was different. It was made up of 3 shelves and 2 drawers. The top shelf had books, and the middle shelf a flower vase. The flower vase was gone, and the books had been moved to the middle of the shelf. Now that I think of it, I never saw that horrible pink flower vase again. It had been a wedding gift from an aunt of your mother's. They say that art is subjective, but that vase was so ugly and difficult to look at. Thank you, Father. You see how closing your eyes worked? Also, the security man Samuel, did he leave at the same time as we did? I think so. Yes, he did. I remember I paid him for the whole month. He was absent a few days after what happened. He said his mother was in the hospital and he needed to be with her. I think for 3 or 4 days. It was a relief for me. His whistling would have driven me to commit an act of violence. It was always the same song over and over again, from a very popular South African singer at the time. When it wasn't that, it was a nursery rhyme. I would wonder why someone of that age would be whistling such a tune. I asked him a few times if he didn't know any other songs, and his reply was that they reminded him of home as his mother loved them. Funny thing is that he lived 55 kilometers away. It wasn't like he'd moved to the end of the world. Why did you ask about the furniture arrangement and Samuel? I'll let you know in a few days. I'll call you tomorrow. Make sure you go on a walk like the good doctor advised. Her father murmured something unintelligible before hanging up. Ironic that these are the longest conversations I've ever had with my father. I need to find a way to get into the house and check the wall where that unit was. I think if someone painted the house and moved objects around, they could have been hiding a bullet hole. Plus, the disappearance of that vase is significant. The question is, how do I get in to look? I think the best bet is through the landlord. He could speak to the tenants and offer a free paint job or something. But what explanation do I give him for looking for a bullet? Or, I get my friend in the force to go there and see if there's a bullet, Alex replied, trying to find the safest way to solve things. No, I don't want to involve them yet and spook whoever's behind this. I know what I'll do. I'll go and speak to Angela, the neighbor that gave me the photographs. Her sister told us she heard a gunshot, so I'll ask her to please ask them if they can allow us to see if there's a hole in the wall. I'll show her the letter if I have to. One way or the other, I'll get into that house. Gabrielle looked at Alex, determination written all over her face, and he observed her quietly. To stay up to date with my latest episodes, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.